This is a book review of King's Reach, John Sanders, 25 years at the top of comics. Now, John Sanders there, see the spine, and there's the back. Now, there's a variety of comics, obviously Fleetway comics, Action, Misty, Battle, Tammy, 2000 AD, and it's not all things like 2000 AD. It covers a massive period of comics all the way through, and I found it absolutely fascinating. Now, how many pages? It's got 272 pages. There's not many pages of photos, unfortunately. There's a few, but it's a lot of text, all about the management issues, what was the problems of the distribution, the various things like mock-ups, a lot of the background detail, what happened, and it was fascinating later on. Also, many of the reasons that explaining why certain things happened. I must admit, when I was growing up, obviously the comics, quite often they would sort of obviously be incorporated into another one. I was always disappointed by that, but apparently there was reasons for that, and there was sort of to create. So to me, it was always, but it's really nice that finally actually having some real massive amounts of information about that period of all variety of comics that I just loved when I was growing up. So it's just, and also not just that, also about lots of other characters he mentions, like of Michael Parkinson here. I love there's some really quite funny scenes all the way through this book. It's just fascinating. And there's also lots of information about like the sales of comics, how they were, a whole range of production things. So it's just, and also many of the other figures that are involved. Now I'm just quickly looking through the book and you can see it's predominantly, obviously all text, but there's a few photos. So I'll just quickly go through to, there's some photos. So you've got a little bit of photos, and obviously some of the, this is the launch of the Yugoslav edition of The World of Wonder. How odd. But this was the thing about it, a lot of obviously international as well. It's a lot of mentions about here. You've got the Dutch editor of the youth group's comic, girls comic, Tina. So it's about male comics, obviously boys comics, and also girls comics as well. So you've also got a lot about that, the Disney, and it's really fascinating, all about the licensing of the various stories. Just things that I must admit, why would I know about those? Obviously I'm not involved in that industry. So, I love the comics, but I've never really gone into all those sort of things. So it's absolutely fascinating. It's obviously all about Fleetway, IPC, etc. So it's just really, really good. And also about magazines that just didn't work, magazines that sort of didn't last very long. Obviously, like things, there's a lot about like Look and Learn, which I just rushed out and bought a copy of Look and Learn because of this book. And also the Ranger magazine, which I must admit I'd never bought. So it was fascinating to, and also mentions about things like Shoot and the Match magazines, the football magazines, about not having comic strips in them, as just having them purely football. I must admit there was a sort of thing, I probably wouldn't have enjoyed having a book if it came out with a comic, but there were a few, there were odd stories, but it was, and I must admit I agree with a lot of points here with these things about like football, whether you go for an entire sports magazine. I have to say, an entire sports magazine where you've got tennis, cricket, I suppose some people like all sports, but most people like particular sports, and therefore you probably think, oh, you know what, I'm only interested in that bit. But saying that, I love like the Infinity magazine, where it covers TV, media, magazines, science fiction, models, and all that sort of thing. So sometimes it's perfectly reasonable to get a magazine that covers a lot of things. But we also like Shiver and Shake there, and Jack and Jill. Also, it mentions all the sort of like the real, obviously very young kids magazines as well. So it goes through all the details about all the, like Toby and all those ones. Magazines that are sadly all long gone. I would love to see them again, but this is, I didn't even say who's this by the company that now is, for me, is at least doing an amazing job of bringing all these lovely comic books that were in the past back, and also producing some new comic books, which is really good because, of course, the scene has changed. So to think, nostalgically think, it'd be really good if Sandy was around or Misty was still around on a weekly basis. And also, of course, at about 6p or something would be even better. But it's just not going to happen. That world has changed. Obviously, there's vast amounts of other things, videos, DVDs, obviously videos. That shows my age. You know what I mean. There's lots of things for attention for people. Obviously, people got games and many other things, mobile phones, so they're not going to love all the sort of things that I still think are pretty amazing. But it is quite sad when he mentions things about the history of all this material. But at least the original art for quite a lot of this is still available, and hopefully Rebellion will be bringing these out over a period of time. I would love to see thousands of books of all this sort of thing, because of course with Marvel and DC, you've got loads of this. So it goes through, in this book, mentions is like 30 seconds to sell 30 individual comic titles, beggars believe, and there's sort of whole heaps about meetings with people as well. So it's just, I found this fascinating. Also about all our comics here, all our comics would have lost money, blah blah blah. Whole range of different things, all about the various circulations, and like he always mentions, like the bean counters. It was a weird expression, bean counters, but I guess it's those sort of things. The unions as well. There is a whole range of topics covered in this, and it's just a joy to read. I'm really pleased I bought this book. I just love these and I hope that other people who, of course, in the industry as well, come out with books as well, because it's nice not just a one point of view, obviously, because this is obviously his point of view, which is absolutely superb, but it's nice to have other people's points of view as well. So I'm always happy as soon as anyone brings out books like this. I'm just great to read. And also I love here, there's like mentions like the Music Star one. I don't actually remember that magazine at all. That completely escapes me. David Cassidy, Michael Jackson, Donny Osmond, of course, all those sort of people. I remember loads, there were like millions of music mags, but I guess probably Music Star, I probably would have looked at it and probably not sort of thing I would buy. I was buying Marvel comics. It also mentions about DC Thompson, of course, and all Roy the Rovers, Buster, obviously 2000. Not too much about 2000 AD, which is I'm very, very pleased it didn't, because there's quite a lot of books about 2000 AD already. So it's just great that there was a lot more detail about things that the other sort of magazines all the way back into the 60s, etc. And it's just fascinating. But women's even mentions about all the various women's magazines, that they were the big sellers, which I find staggering now. And apparently like the Germans coming into the system, that when they started bringing out their magazine, how they sort of like really caused problems for I must admit, I don't think the women's magazines. I love the old women's magazines. They're great for the stories. That's about the only thing. I really love the old 50s and 60s. When you get old copies, they're fascinating. But in terms of magazines, I must admit, they're not magazines that I would particularly buy. But they're still, of course, in the shops. They're still going, though. Women's Weekly is still going, isn't it? Women's Realm, I think that's gone. I don't know who. But it's just, I found this absolutely joy. And I love this. There are some comic pages, and there's one here when he's looking over, casting an approving eye over the artboard. It's nice to see the artboard in terms of this, because you don't really, I don't know if the size is the same like the Marvel comics, of course, had a certain art page. Now, I would love to see a massive collection of art pages, like the IDW bring out the artist editions. Would be superb if there was an artist editions of some of these older. Now, I've got some art pages, obviously none of these ones, because these are immensely collectible, and obviously they're stored away. But they've got some sort of comic book pages. It's absolutely glorious to have comic book pages. But it's some of these ones, you've got other ones here. Absolutely glorious. I mean, I wish to be honest, I just think it's great if they just bring these out, these big volumes like that. I would buy them in an instant. Obviously, they have to be reasonably priced. Obviously, 6p would be really nice, but no, it's not going to happen. Obviously, like IDW, they're over £100, but they are superb quality books. So I would love to see that, but that's my one wish. But there's also lots and lots of mentions about loads and loads of other things, about all the publishers. And like I say, about football, I love the one about football. Because I bought Shoot, I loved all those sort of things. I was a mega football fan, and though I did sort of minor criticism, it says about fantasising about the people who buy one comic would be fantasising about the comics. I don't think that. I play football all the time, but I never had a fantasy that I wanted to become a football player. The idea of that would have been, I was never that interested in football. I love football, but I never thought, I want to play it. I want to draw and paint and work in whole heaps of areas, but I never ever had thought, I'm going to become a footballer. Love to sing, all those sort of things. But football, it never appealed to me. I loved watching it, and I loved reading about it. I mean, I enjoyed Billy's Boots and things. They were great stories. That's the key thing, stories. And I would love to see more magazines like that again. But sadly that world has gone. But of course the Japanese have got millions of those sort of things. I love those sports magazines. So clearly there is some support for sports mags. Though there's not many Marvel comic ones. Though a few, but very rarely do you get sports comic book strips. And I love the old annuals, and he mentions about annuals here as well, which I love as well. So there's a lot of talk about annuals. And I must admit, things I didn't realise about annuals and the specials. And all about how, the payment of the artists and things, what all the secondary rights and things. Fascinating stuff. Absolutely. I love that sort. It also talks about here, I just flick to a page, country life. Just really brilliant, thoroughly easy to read, thoroughly engrossing story. I love this. And I must admit, because after reading this, I must go out and look, because apparently it's got at the back, he's got here, he's an established crime writer. So I must check out some of his books. I'm certain they're going to be, definitely written super well. This was excellent, thorough. And I love always like these afterwards, where it actually turns around telling all the details of all the people involved in this. Obviously, a famous one here, Robert Maxwell. Kevin Maxwell, and then there's obviously IPC magazines, Fleetway publications, the archives bought by Rebellion, Oxford publishers of this book, and absolutely brilliant. So, and also subsequently acquired the pre-1970s archives from TI Media, and reuniting vast, just superb. And like I say, I really hope that Rebellion bring out more and more of these books, as well as these sort of books. I would love to see more history books about, also reference books about, because there's no reference books as far as I'm aware of comics. I mean, I suppose there's a few, but not reference books in the way that I mean, where it's like literally an index of every issue. Does it exist? Every issue? Where you can see Misty issue 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or Sandy issue 1, 2, 3, 4, and all the sort of issues. I don't know. Maybe some enterprise and soul has brought one out. But still, that's my apologies for making this video. My own sort of about comics. But I just really revealed to me lots of things about comics that I just did not know, the British comics. And I will treasure this because of that. Because I've had certain opinions about things that I think, that's the reason why X, Y, Z happened. And actually he's revealed that I was completely wrong. And so it's absolutely brilliant. I will thank him for that. That's just absolutely, and obviously, of course, all the brilliant comics that he brought out. It's just a pity now there's no comics in the ways that it was. But the world's changed. And it's pointless to think that it should be, when I pop down to see a news agency, look at all the millions of magazines now, completely different from the world of these ones. Also, he mentioned another thing, another pet thing that always gets me, mentions photo strips, the comic, and that was always baffled me as well. I never could understand photo strips. I bought a few over the years, and they're interesting in a way. They're actually quite fascinating, but I just never could see the appeal to them. That's actually when I stopped being interested in UK comics, when they went to the photo strip things. Just not remotely, just didn't do anything for me. Because, of course, the stories, you can't, what can you do? Well, you could have done a photo strip of the Victorian comics like they did in Misty or Ginty or something. So you could have had stories like that. That would have been brilliant. But they didn't. They just did stories where they're it just did not appeal to me in the slightest. But obviously appealed to a different audience. Obviously those comics sold well, I guess so. That's what they went for. So all these sort of things are all mentioned in this, and it's just a real eye-opener. And I loved this all the way through. And books and magazines, of course, some of them I've never heard of. And again, this is the one trouble with these books, is that you end up then have to go and look for these books, these comics. And you, of course, go and search and find out things like Look and Learn and whatever, which I must admit I had really never given much of a look at. So it's really fascinating. So after all that, it's a review. My apologies for not showing much, because there isn't much. Obviously, it's just text all the way through. I absolutely loved this book. Totally brilliant. Brilliant that it's been brought out. Excellent. Totally recommended. 25 years at the top of comics. John Sanders.